few years ago, I was sat at work. In the middle of a 10-hour workday. Following a 10-hour workday. With another 10-hour workday to come. I had no more podcasts to listen to. I had nothing new musically to listen to. And nothing I had was doing it for me right at that moment. I turned to the gentleman sat next to me and said, "Recommend me something to listen to." Without skipping a beat, he turned to me and said, 2112 by Rush. I always thought prog was a dirty word, something only dads listened to, sat on beanbags with large headphones on. But with nothing better to listen to, I loaded up Spotify, typed Rush into the search bar, scrolled down through the albums till I came to 2112, and clicked on it. To little surprise, the first minute was taken up with 70s space-age synth, my eyes already hurting from the amount of rolling they were about to endure. Some nice guitar riffs followed. It was keeping me interested, but I was yet to be wowed, and I was already a quarter of the way through this 20-minute endurance test, and still no singing. The music suddenly stops. Running water takes over. What sounds like a guitar tuning. It's all very soothing. Then the words that would forever change my view on progressive rock started.
What can this strange device be? When I touch it, it gives forth a sound.
All of a sudden I got it. A story was being told, not just a boy meets girl, an all is well story that can be told in 3 minutes, but a story in the truest sense of the word, starting with world building, having a protagonist, and good triumphing over evil. This was a mind-blowing moment on the level of seeing Star Wars for the first time as a child. Suddenly my eyes were open, and even though I had come across them before, in the loosest possible terms, I finally understood the concept of a concept album. But what is a concept album? The best definition I could find for the term concept album comes from the Collins English Dictionary, describing it as an album that has a unifying theme or that tells a single story. But where did it all begin? What was the story behind the story album? Let's take a look from execution to concept. The evolution of the concept album is a story that can be easily broken down in a nice narrative structure, told decade by decade. But to find the beginning of our story, we have to travel all the way back to 1940 and folk musician Woody Guthrie.
Back in 1927, I had a little farm and I called that heaven. Well, the price is up and the rain come down and I hauled my crops all into town. I got the money, bought clothes and groceries, fed the kids and raised the family.
Whose collection of song entitled Dust Bowl Ballads was his attempt to convey to the listening audience the struggle of living through the Dust Bowl era in Oklahoma in the 1930s, telling a story of theft, murder, and unbearable hardship set against the backdrop of the American West. Up until this point, an album was just that, a stack of different short pieces of music, all on 75 RPM records, all enclosed in a book, much like a photo album. And to show you the state of albums as a format at the time, Dust Bowl Ballads came on 6 records. That's 12 sides of music for only 45 minutes. Not the most convenient way to tell a story for your music. It would take the next technological step to arrive, and arrive it did on June 18th, 1948 with the announcement by Columbia Records of the long-playing vinyl, or LP for short. Although introduced to help with the flow of classical music that was hampered by the 78 format, this gave artists much more freedom to experiment with music on a larger scale. And so the journey of the concept album continues. The next stop after its folk beginnings was of course pop, and the king of the crooners, Francis Albert Sinatra.
In the wee small hours of the morning, while the whole wide world is fast asleep.
Frank's 1955 album, In the Wee Small Hours, is considered the first concept album as we know it today. Albums from this time period tended to be little more than collections of singles, but Sinatra developed a distinction between songs intended as singles for radio airplay and for jukeboxes, and those songs he intended to package together in an album. It is assumed that this album's grouping of Love Gone Bad songs and Sinatra's poignant renderings were a direct result of Sinatra's failing relationship with Ava Gardner, to the point where Frank personally referred to this as the Ava album. According to biographer Will Friedwald, Sinatra sequenced the songs so that the lyrics created a flow from track to track, affording an impression of a narrative. As in musical comedy or opera, he was the first pop singer to bring a consciously artistic attitude to recording. And so the 50s gave way to the 60s, and the evolution continued. Bands and artists began to realise that the studio could be used for more than just recording the track as they would perform it on stage. The studio had a whole host of toys, and it would be rude not to play with them. And so as the album evolved, so did the concept album, most famously in two works in particular. The first, of course, being the Beatles' seminal Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It was 20 years ago today. Sergeant.
The Beatles' use of alter egos to present Sgt. Pepper's would add another string to the bow of the concept album. That would be put to excellent use down the decades. I firmly believe, without Billy Shears, there would be no Ziggy.
With Sergeant Pepper.
But I feel its biggest influence, and really to nail down what the world would consider as a quote-unquote concept album, would be the creation of the rock opera. And this would be achieved in an album with the story about a boy growing up through hardship. And it's not the one playing in the background. The album is called The Story of Simon Simopath, and the band is Nirvana. Nope, not that one. This one.
Out into space for the space of a year. Favorite companion will always be near. You and your lady have left us today. Satellite jockey has gone away and away.
This silly psychedelic album has the privilege of being considered the world's first rock opera. Being released in 1967, it tells the life story of the titular character and tells the well-worn story we've all heard before of an unpopular boy who dreams of having wings and, following a nervous breakdown, gets on board a rocket and befriends a centaur, then falls in love and marries a tiny goddess called Magdalena. Far out, man. And so, we get to the 70s, and, well, what can be said? The explosion of creativity across acts and genres has never been seen before or since. The concept album hit the stratosphere and gave us some of the best albums of all time. Let's just list them. Dark Side of the Moon, Quadrophenia, Thick as a Brick, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, War of the Worlds, Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Jesus Christ, Superstar, Welcome to My Nightmare, Mothership Connection, What's Going On, Joe's Garage, Tubular Bells, to name just a few, and all are classics. And this era of concept album has been talked about to death. But more interesting to me is, after such an explosion of creativity, what could have brought it to such a grinding halt? Once again, we have to point the accusatory finger firmly in the direction of music television and the rise of the music video. Record companies saw that the singles were where the money was, not the hugely budgeted albums of the 70s. And while some artists like Roger Waters and Styx tried to carry the torch, you could tell their heart just wasn't even in it anymore. And there you have it, the concept albums were uncool, and were finally something that you just thought your dad listened to. It wouldn't be till the early noughties, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, after a decade of steps and Britney and Boyzone and Britpop and techno, those crazy kids picked up their dad's records once again, and saw that there could be so much more. Green Day did the seemingly impossible, and did what was considered an anathema to their genre, and created a punk concept album. Mascara Street Emo's My Chemical Romance also released The Black Parade, an album that would be comfortably at home with any of its 70s glam contemporaries. Sgt. Stephen's beautiful indie masterpiece Illinois, Jay-Z's American Gangster, and anything released by Public Service Broadcasting.
12 minutes now until ignition for powered descent. Everything's still looking very good at this point. Okay, all flight controllers, gonna go for powered descent.
The concept album has once again found its way back into our hearts and minds. But what does the future hold for the concept album? I personally feel in this binge-watching Netflix generation that we're in at the moment, that the concept album could be utilised in such a way that artists could be releasing album year on year to tell a consistent storyline throughout. How entertaining would it be to see your favourite band release an album every year that would continue the story, much in the way you would binge-watch an episode of Game of Thrones? But for now, it's nice to know that the concept album is still alive and well, and being used by those who still appreciate and love it.
So I'm someone who loves concept albums, but concept albums that you kind of touched on fall into sort of one of two camps.
Yes.
In that you either have a story or you have some kind of thematic thing that pulls.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's either War of the Worlds or it's Sgt. Pepper's. It's where it's a string of songs where there is a concept vaguely there, but it is just Sgt. Pepper's isn't a concept album. It's in the story sense because there's no story being told. It's a selection of Beatles songs. So the concept is that it's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, not the Beatles.
I'm going to make this slightly proper music.
Yeah, no,
I'm already beard stroke.
Yeah, this is proper beard stroke.
So the two things are concepts in terms of like musicality.
Yeah.
In terms of how the thing sounds, but then there's concept in terms of narration. Or
yes.
Narrative is probably the better word. In classical music, that's called programmatic music. So, like, Vivaldi's The Four Seasons is essentially a concept album.
It is, yes.
Using those things. So there's those kind of two...
Yeah.
I think those are the best way. So you've got concept musically and then...
It's more a concept piece because there was no such thing as an album. In the early days of album work, it would essentially be a selection of songs thrown together, written by different people, with different musicians playing on it, with maybe a focus point in a singer. They were a collection of songs. An album, in the idea of a concept album, is somebody who's written the entire album from a certain perspective with the same group of people performing on it.
I suppose in a weird way, this is not somewhere I expected to go with this, but like essentially the musical is a concept album.
Yes.
Right?
Well,
narrative
essentially, I mean, in this day and age where The Greatest Showman stays at the top of the charts forever,
just been knocked off the top.
Oh,
of
is
the
it
charts.
finally off?
I think Drake's new album's taking it.
Oh,
top
did you
of the
hear
charts.
about total aside? Did you hear about the Spotify kickoff? Loads of people have asked for refunds.
Why?
Because people like me pay for Spotify, and Drake was on like every promoted playlist, and he was advertised across the top. I specifically pay for Spotify so we don't get ads. Loads of people have asked for
motherfuckers.
refunds. Yeah. So like. Yeah, so Porgy and Bess is a concept album. Vivaldi's a concept album. Grease is a concept album.
Yeah. Any musical is a concept album because it is a series of music telling a story, essentially.
Well, then you extract the kind of stage or visual element from it. That's where you're at, right?
Yes.
With this piece.
Yeah.
There's a definite line where people go all in with the concept, isn't there? Because I was saying to Craig before we started recording that if any band from a period of time when there's a main songwriter, the band would be writing from a certain perspective. How they were feeling at that time might even be the studio where they're writing and recording from, how what part in their cycle of the career they're at.
Difficult second album.
Exactly. So there is, I can kind of feel a conceptual element to bands or musicians where there are one integral songwriter. I think there is obviously a jump when people go all in, say with visual element or a kind of totally cooked up story.
Well, brilliantly. Nothing makes me happier, I'll be honest with you, than when I hear of a concept album, I go out and buy the gatefold, I'll get it home, I'll open it, and there will be the story will be written inside the gatefold for you to read as the music's playing, for you to junction along. 2112 is a very good example of that. Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull is essentially a newspaper is its sleeve that will.
But you were saying before, Thick as a Brick is
a piss take.
It's a piss take off the concept album.
Even the title is a piss take because concept albums, even at the time, were considered the highfalutin academic side of things. So Jethro Tull decides to follow the sort of thoughts that he was given that his previous album Aqualung
banger. I've got
is a
gatefold pop-up version of Aqualung. That's about 50 quid.
Fucking pop-up album.
But that says it all, I feel.
But he's adamant that's not a concept album, whereas everyone considers that to be the concept album. So as a rebuff to you want me to write a concept album, here is my concept album, and it's entirely a piss take. Even the title Thick as a Brick, and the concept is it's written by an 8-year-old boy winning a contest.
Yeah. The thing is though, that rings large with when I started listening to music or when I started reading rock journalism, that concept albums, the theory of and the writing of concept albums was so out of fashion that even if someone released an album with a thematic link, say like a 9 Inch Nails or someone like that, they would run a fucking mile when they heard the word, and heard the journalist saying, well, your album seems to form and they get, it's like, no, it's not a concept record. It's not. Because everyone would immediately think. Yeah. But even around that time, the example I'm going to give, which isn't deemed as concept album, but for me, really is in feel, in look, and how it is. The concept's nebulous, right? But there is definitely is the Manics' Holy Bible, which is an album that focuses on the vile side of the human condition, from fucking serial killers, prostitution and the Holocaust, and matched with music that is so angular, so post-punk, it sounds like the clank of machinery and the fucking doors slamming on the ovens in Belson, you know what I mean? It's but that's how dark it is. To quote one of the samples on the album, it's almost like they want to
rub the human face in its own vomit and then force it to look in the mirror.
But that is not deemed a concept album, although it is conceptual. Yeah. So there's a greyness to all of this. However, there are definite stone cold concept records.
Yeah. Anything by Yes is a concept album.
Starless and Bible Black. Which is the greatest title of any album ever created in my book.
I'll tell you what I did learn.
Tom Jones's greatest hits.
Oh, yeah. Velvet plus steel equals gold.
Indeed. What I did learn about concept album, the weirdest concept albums.
I can talk for fucking hours on this, so do be
Yes albums.
Going for the one. Well, all of them, yeah.
The covers are a concept within themselves because the covers by Roger Dean were designed apropos of regardless of the music, they were designed themselves. So rather than him waiting for the band to write the music, he would design an album cover following on from the previous album cover. So the album art of a Yes album.
Really? So it's like sequential?
Is sequentially telling a story. Wow. So it's a concept within a concept.
Not wow. The Yes album covers are a fucking abortion. They are fucking vile.
They are a very specific moment in time. But they're going for the one album cover, which was not one of...
No, it's not a Roger Dean ones, no.
I think it's really interesting. Do you want me to dig it out from the racks?
Every time someone mentions going for the one, it always reminds me of this sexist joke, which I will cut, but you guys will hear, which is it a concept album about women playing darts? But we'll move on from that.
Oh, brutal. In fact, you know what? Let's deal with the obvious ones first then, since we're we've never touched on concepts really before on the pod, and then it's something that I find really interesting, and it's something I really enjoy. A good concept album. So let's do it obvious. So Dark Side.
Dark Side of the Moon, yeah.
Concept album, but it's not particularly narrative. It's just
the concept.
Well, I scribbled down before that The Who were the best conceptual album, but Dark Side of the Moon is the best example of a concept album. The thing that I really like and get out of concept records are not just the thematic pieces of it, but you know when someone sets out and says, I'm going to do this as a thematic piece, and how they got to go through that narrative with sound. And that's the best thing about Dark Side of the Moon, because
it's mostly meaningless.
But it's mostly, but it isn't as well though, is it? Because it's an existential conundrum.
Yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon. It's the disease that we all have. You know, that pressure pushing down on us that none of us can really understand or explain, and they try to explain it.
Amy, I feel this great pressure coming down on me. It's just constantly coming down on me. Crushing me.
But it's the talking, it's the sound of the bells.
It is
those
the talking.
bits make it.
It is the bit at the start of Great Gig in the Sky when they have the janitor, the caretaker of the studio, who's been sweeping up, they interview him about what it is like, what he thinks it's like to die.
Yeah.
At the start of Great Gig in the Sky, I'm like, oh, this is the fucking... And, you know, I mentioned that that's the first album that I ever bought on vinyl. There's a reason that was the first album I ever bought, because it just felt... Especially like at 16, that felt so weighty and significant.
Fucking hell, if you were listening to that at 16,
Yeah,
it hit you early. Did you guys listen to S-Town?
No.
Really?
Oh, yes, no, the podcast. Yes, I did. Yeah, the
podcast
spin-off from Serial.
No, I didn't. I didn't like Serial, so I didn't do it.
Do yourself a favour, listen to S-Town, just blast it through in a day. It's about 7 hours work, but it's absolutely brilliant. And that focuses on a clockmaker, right, who is a kind of free thinker. No spoilers, but just listen to it yourself. But there's a bit on that, and I can't remember the quote verbatim, but it's about another guy who is...
When John's friend Bill was showing me his clock collection in his house, he cried too. I'd asked Bill what the allure of clocks was for him, and he'd started telling me about the first clock he was entranced by. A cheap kitchen clock in his grandparents' house. He'd watch his grandfather pick it up and wind it every Sunday when he was a young boy. He was mesmerized by how this object suddenly became alive, ticking, hands turning. And he began crying as he told me. Is it that clock? I asked him, that was emotional for him. It's not any one personal clock, he said. It was just, the measure of time had something to do with me. I didn't totally know what Bill meant by this. The measure of time had something to do with me. But I think he was saying that even as a kid, the clock captured this feeling of time going by, and never coming back.
And I get this because there's something about a clock, the movement of time, the seconds ticking away, that you don't understand, but it speaks to you. So for me, that is the undercurrent of Dark Side of the Moon. The bit before time, fucking hell, it destroys me. And then all the bells going off at once.
Yeah.
Goosebumps.
Okay, so I'm just going to bash out a few. So Park Life, concept album, classic concept album, was originally going to be called London.
Yeah, I think essentially the same as a lot of... I mean, Madness is Rise and Fall.
Yeah,
is considered concept.
But with Park Life, that's what led me on to reading London Fields, because he read London Fields and all that is from that album. Great record. Such a great record.
The perfect companion piece to Park Life for me is Lou Reed's Transformer. Because if you want to talk about like a time and a place, Park Life is perfect time and place. And so is Transformer. Perfect time and place. Like hanging out with Andy Warhol, drag queens, loads of drugs.
I think I could listen to those two albums back to back.
Oh no, they're so jarring.
Kinks.
Do you see that though with Park Life? Because there's a lot of real lovely shade.
There is, but it is essentially it is
just the way it ends as well. In fact, it's a bit of a false ending because it's lot 105 is the last, which is an instrumental, an organ instrumental on Park Life. This is a low, which is pretty much takes place on Brighton seafront. It's the end. It's quite literally the end of the country, the end of the album, and it's just an enormous, a massive vista of a song.
But like those are just great concept albums. But like there's some that are more worthy of talking about, like faves. But do you guys want to talk about anything before we talk about faves?
No, I think I've sort of covered my bases. Well, anything sort of mid to late 70s Rush, where the first side of the album was conceptual, so you would get a 25-minute conceptual piece on side 8 and then 3 or 4 songs separately.
When was Particles and Waves?
80s.
Right.
So you're looking at
It's called Particles, isn't it?
Permanent Waves.
Permanent Waves.
Like 2112, as I mentioned, and Hemispheres, where you have a side of the album committed to a story being told. And
That's if I've got a favourite Rush album, the one I've sat in James's car. No, when I've been sat in James's car, Hemispheres was the one where I thought, I can get along with this. This is all right.
Yeah.
You won't probably catch me listening to it at home, but it was bearable. Pet Sounds. No one's mentioned Pet Sounds.
I don't rate it.
Not the fact you don't rate it, conceptual.
For me, Pet Sounds, the only thing conceptual about Pet Sounds is the recording process.
Yeah.
The same with Sgt. Pepper's.
Or even the recording process.
Process. Yeah, the recording process for Pet Sounds is the thing that is conceptual, not the material. But like, oh look, we're doing stereo, we're doing this, we've got tape loops, same with Sgt. Pepper's. Like we've got all this kind of nonsense.
We're playing with new
Mellotron.
toys.
Yeah, that's what makes it conceptual. Nothing to do with what, like good vibrations. How is that anything conceptual?
We're going into the mind of Brian fucking Wilson here, mate. I mean, everything's conceptual. It's not even that. No, it's not that. It was like LSD trip, freak out, everyone eats fucking vegetables. Well, like, you know, chomp on this fucking carrot. Chomp on this carrot whilst fucking singing.
Yeah,
well, to probably lift...
It's not awful.
To lift my foot and probably step right on Liam's toes, what about What's Going On?
Oh, no, you've sold me on that. Yeah. What's Going On is as
soul concept.
important as Ghost Town in terms of making a political statement.
Yeah. Well, even the fact that it fades out as it starts, it's almost like a loop, isn't it? The sound that ends the album starts the album.
Yeah.
I've never talked about him really before, I don't think, apart from maybe in a best of the year. BT, who's like one of my favourite producers of all time.
Telecom provider.
Not a funny joke after 40 years.
Still a funny joke after all these years.
No, just one of my little... Just with regards to that, Movement in Still Life ends with a very particular sound, which is like the sound of the NASA astronaut telecommunication system going beep and turning off. His next album starts with exactly the same sound. Like that. And I just really like the fact that you can kind of interweave those
again,
two
that's
things.
the stuff that Rush was doing. They would have chapter 1 on side B of an album.
Oh,
and
cool.
then 12 months later, chapter 2 and 3 would be on side A of the next album. So there would be a year gap. It would be, like I say, with the Netflix binge watching side of things, is there a market for a storytelling that goes a season by season, essentially?
That's interesting as well.
Depends on the musician. I mean, just because it's concept doesn't mean that it's going to be great. And look at Yes, there is not. Yes, it's fucking awful.
So, some more modern concept albums that I really like are bands like Public Service Broadcasting.
Oh yes, Race of Spaces.
Race of Space, or their first EP, which I know isn't an album, but like
the new one about
the War Room,
the Welsh mining industry.
Yeah.
Race of Space is on the things I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I think it's
Go
makes me cry.
Go's brilliant. You've listened to Inform, Educate, Entertain.
Yeah,
that's
good.
Still my favourite.
No,
still my favourite.
Go,
brilliant.
like, you know that
thing, whatever that
God,
thing
that's
is.
so difficult to, especially without being able to mime you pointing at like your solar plexus on air.
Solar plexus.
That thing that's just so ineffable and makes your skin burn. There's something about Go that makes me just weep. Speaking of weeping, actually, you know what makes me weep?
Go on.
Streets. Second album.
Ah, yes.
Dry your eyes, mate.
So,
are we going to have the story of crying in Tesco's?
You cried in Tesco's.
I did cry in Tesco.
You cried in Tesco's.
Yeah, walking around Tesco, first time I'd heard that album, heard that track, and just wept like a fucking child in Tesco.
I do the prices.
Can I talk about 4 things really quickly, and you can cut whatever you don't want?
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, yeah. Number 1 on the list. I think it's the greatest concept album ever made. Disco Aliens. Who doesn't fucking want that?
I personally prefer Journey to the Centre of the Earth. of the two. I consider them as like
Yeah.
as two sides to the same coin.
They are very much the same idea.
Yes,
given
having
voice,
a
yeah.
narrator in between tracks to progress the story. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing, but I prefer Journey to the Centre of the Earth, if only because I think it's better orchestrated. I know that War of the Worlds probably has the better tracks singularly and the more memorable riff with dun dun dun.
Yeah.
But as a piece of work, as a concept album, I prefer Journey.
I think War of the Worlds will always hold a special place in my heart because the sound of the aliens in War of the Worlds still to this day terrifies me. It reminds me of being like 5 years old, hidden under a duvet on the living room sofa.
That's a
listening
totally
to
different Proustian rush that we've
Yeah.
not covered before. It's not a nice feeling.
No,
is
it's
it?
not. But it's still really
It's like anyone that
terrifies me.
mentions fucking Ghostwatch.
Oh,
Do you know what I mean?
That's a whole other thing. Have you ever heard the follow-up to War of the Worlds?
You sent Spartacus. Spartacus, yeah.
Do you know about this?
No.
Let me give you the rundown. So it is Anthony Hopkins, which is not a bad show considering War of the Worlds was Burton. So Anthony Hopkins is a pretty good show.
Friend
actually.
of.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh, Welsh.
They all know each
they're
other.
both Welsh. No, it's just like Welsh. All Welsh people.
While
friends with each
we're on the Welshes, Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Zeta-Jones.
So when was this made?
1992.
Oh fucking hell!
He waited 15 years to
before she started getting molested by Michael Douglas and his 3 arms.
It gets worse. So Alan King of Blind Faith, Fish of Marillion,
Derek William Dick,
and Jimmy Helms.
Who's Jimmy Helms?
Of London Beat.
Fuck off!
So yeah, if you want it, listen to it. But there's also Return to the Centre of the Earth, isn't there?
I like Return to the Centre of the Earth. That's Patrick Stewart. Isn't
Ozzy,
it?
Bonnie Tyler, Justin Hayward, and Patrick Stewart.
That is.
I think it works. I quite like Return to the Centre of the Earth.
What are you doing all day today? Well, you'll be listening to DAACast.
Last issue you mentioned Bonnie. Oh, we didn't put it on air actually. We were talking about Bon Iver, Forever Forever.
Oh yes, we did. We were talking.
And you said it was the
I can't remember what I said.
modern version of.
It's the modern version of Nebraska. In the concept that
Are we calling Nebraska a concept?
No, not well, it's a concept of the fact that Springsteen just was his wit's end at that point and took himself off. The thing is with Nebraska, it's conceptual in the fact that it was demos. It was just demos, and they just went, this works. And the famous story about the tape being dropped in off the boat and blah blah blah. But Bon Iver, that forever ago.
Yeah,
that's heartbroken. Take yourself off to a shed in the middle of a wood. And
they did the same thing.
But it's there's a slight.
Last couple of things. There is a trifecta of stunning concept albums by three women, because they're slurred.
Three women.
Three ladies.
Britney by Britney, Xtina by Christina,
and the Sugar Babes' first album.
I'm gonna say Robin, Body Talk.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Madonna, Confessions on a Dance Floor, and I'm gonna say Khalees, Flesh Tone. Those three albums, three women playing with dance music to do a concept album. Those three albums are well worth listening to it. Block Party's third album, Intimacy, which I don't think Craig will have ever heard.
No, you won't have heard, but that really should have been a song on it.
Have you heard Intimacy?
Block Party. No,
Oh,
man.
mate, Intimacy will wrench your heart in two.
We've had this discussion about wrenching hearts and me.
But
we still need to make him cry.
I know, it's still on the list. No, Block Party, Intimacy, the death of a relationship, basically. And the guy Keely is dating dies of cancer.
Oh, spoiler alert.
And it is like, you know it from track one. It's just...
And then flashback, it's like fucking Lost all over again.
Mate,
but I think that will always be a very human narrative, that, won't it?
Yeah,
when people
like-
are going through pain, they write some fucking awesome records.
There's a tune in it called Biko that
isn't...
nothing to do with Biko, oddly.
Right.
Yeah.
Spelled the same?
Yeah, but it means sweetheart in... oh, God, he's Nigerian, isn't he? I can't remember what his language is.
Nigerian.
No, there's a very specific... Anyway.
Let's just say Nigerian.
Yeah. But it's about his boyfriend finding out he's got cancer. It's just like, oh my god, just so much.
This is not a concept album I want to listen to. I want to listen to stories of adventure and
in that
science
case,
fiction, not
should we talk about
cancer.
Should we talk about Scatman John's concept album?
Yeah, I know. Scatman's World. Yeah.
Scatman's World is a fucking concept album.
Yeah.
It starts with a statement about welcoming the listener to Scatman's World, where everything is beautiful.
This is the point where I've got to stop and stare at Liam in the face just to see if he's taking the piss out of me. Scatman John wrote a concept album.
Imagine a land.
Check the writing on the side rather than
I owned this album, so I don't need to.
Well, I'm not being funny. Reactions immediately. The cover.
It's great, isn't it?
This is not great in any way, shape, or form.
If you're wondering where this magical place is, you don't have to look too far. You'll find it between the
This was a single as well.
This is the intro.
Yeah, it's only 50 odd seconds.
All right, no, there was a Welcome to Scatland single. It might have been off the follow-up album before he died in a car crash.
So,
Scatman's World.
this is a total aside. How much do you know about Scatman John?
No, he was a professional jazz musician.
He was an amazing scat musician who had a stutter from being a child, so that's how he got into scat, because he could control it. And then he got cancer and died. But he did like loads of really cool stuff. Let me read you the last 3 sentences of his wiki page. Larkin died at his home in Los Angeles on 3rd of December 1999 at the age of 57. He was survived by his wife Julie, mother Harriet, and his brother Bill. He was cremated and his ashes were scattered at sea. And they put scattered in fucking scare quotes. It filled me with joy.
But no, if seriously, there is a YouTube video by a guy called Todd in the Shadows who does a series called Train Records, which is about albums that totally come out of left field and ruin an artist's career.
Right.
And he did. It was either Train Records or One Hit Wonderland that he did it on. He does 2 series, and he covered Scatman. And if you're looking into the early days of Scatman and what got him into being produced in a Euro dance style, essentially, it's a fascinating watch. It's only about 15 minutes long, so I would heavily recommend Todd in the Shadows video for that.
Cool.